Welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, Doug and I team up to have a conversation with a leader in the field so that we can distill some of their wisdom and share that with you. We're always trying to uplift you on a Monday, give you some hopeful perspective and some insight. And that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
And the show is sponsored by Mainstay, which is the student retention platform that proves its value and its efficacy through peer-reviewed research. It's best known probably, and we've talked about it a bunch, for helping Georgia State reduce summer melt by about 1 in 5, by 21%. And it also helped, another study showed how it helped Georgia State retain 1,200 students. So please check out the research at mainstay.com.
We should see if they're actually watching the show, and our quiz for Mainstay will be that we just start changing the data points based on whatever we want. My favorite fact about Mainstay is that the CEO, Drew Magliozzi's dad, is Ray from Car Talk. That still is going to always be. There's no better factoid about me.
I don't think so.
He hates it when I bring that up because he's bashful, but that's a fun one. Well, yes. And also the Innovating Together podcast is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. We're grateful for their sponsorship and their support. But today we are super excited about our new guest.
We're joined by Barbara Gellman-Danley, who's president of the Higher Learning Commission, nation's largest accreditor. Barbara, welcome. That's great to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We are so delighted to speak with you today because you've had such a distinguished perspective and the vantage point that you sit at HLC, and it's just going to give us, I think, a robust perspective of the higher ed landscape. But you also, as a leader and a coach for leaders, a coach for presidents, has been really important to the field. So we're excited to kick it off by just asking you about you as a leader. I don't think people often talk about the backstory of how they got here, like what your model of leadership that you were following. What has been the most formative experience to kind of shape your version of leadership and how you show up is kind of how we'd love to hear.
Well, I think it started in my first job back in the late 70s when I got interested in distance learning. And I had to learn how to be a leader in order to be heard because I was a faculty member at the time at a startup community college. They were all starting up around that time. I think my style of leadership is pretty simple. Recognize all the positive people around you, create a great atmosphere, and get out of the way. So I'm not a micromanager. In fact, we became an agile organization at HLC, which is a decentralized leadership approach to things. My style is to stay current. I think learning is absolutely important. I've never stopped to lead by example. And like I said, give people an opportunity to grow. And obviously, if there's times when it's not working, know when you need to move on yourself or have others move on. But also the fine art of delegation. And that takes years for people to learn. I've talked to so many people who say, I'm so overloaded. And they talk about their staffs. I say, is there someone else who might be able to help you? So in general, I consider myself the leadership of the team.
I love that. And we also got a series of leadership lessons from you that you shared that I thought were just so clear and valuable for our audience. So we're going to be linking that in the show notes. But I wanted to also ask about if you feel like you have learned more from watching good examples of leadership or bad. I think everyone's kind of formed by both, but I'm just curious if there's which one affected you the most?
I have to say both, because I think from the negative ones, you say, I don't ever want to do that. Or if you're really paying attention, instead of just being critical, you'd say, is there any part of me that would do that? But of course, the positives are the ones you remember very, very strongly in a positive way so that you can help pass that on to other individuals. And I was enormously fortunate. When I was in my early 30s, I was brought up on a soft money grant to the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education. And eventually I became a vice chancellor for pretty much everything that's non-traditional. And you can relate to that, Bridget. So I really feel strongly that the fact that I had a 15 to 20 year plus age gap between myself and those other individuals gave me such positive role models who were ethical, authentic, transparent, caring, great listeners. And those gentlemen at the time, those gentlemen have stayed with me for life.
I'm really interested in the issue about micromanaging, because I think that's a susceptibility that I think a lot of ambitious, smart, talented people have. How I've seen it go so wrong so many times, but how do you fight the tendency as a leader to micromanage and to be able to let people fail enough to, when as is sometimes going to happen? I'm just curious how you think about that.
Well, as an innovator and someone who's challenged authority in the way it always was my entire life, I would say I'm upfront with individuals to say, tell me what I'm getting too involved. I have a couple areas that I can't let go of because I absolutely think I could do a better job based on experience. And one is strategic planning and developing annual trends for our organization. Governance is another, and hopefully leadership. But when we did our first plan, I've been at HLC for 10 years. Everybody had not done that kind of plan before. So I did too much. And they told me, they said, at some point, it might be better if you back off because then we'll buy into it. And the good thing is I learned how to listen by then. And so I followed that direction. But I do think we have to fight the urge, Doug. That's a great question. And we have to realize that if people don't have an opportunity to learn themselves, to lead themselves, they'll never get to where we want them to be as an employee. And talent management is so important. So we have to fight that. We have to realize, is there ego involved? And that hasn't been the case with me on the subjects I mentioned. But if there's an ego involved, you have to let go.
You have been in a position where you've coached a lot of institution leaders, especially through COVID, and have evolved your skills to not just play the role of president of HLC, but also almost like an executive coach to the field. And I'm just curious about when you are giving advice, what do you find is the most consistent advice that I know likely you're giving advice very based on the individual, but do you find yourself noticing that all college presidents need the same piece of advice, or that you most frequently are nudging them about a certain thing that you just find is pretty universally true?
Well, I would say I don't give advice. In other words, I might be a mentor coach, but the difference between coaching and being a mentor is that you help them find the answer. So one particular case, I had a college president, university president called me, and she wanted to give me a heads up that the faculty were upset with her and we were going to hear about it. And we talked through, you don't want to stay in the story too long. You're really coaching the person, but you need the story for context. And then eventually at the end of it, I found myself saying to her, and what have you learned from this? And so in effect, that gives the individual the opportunity to give themselves their own advice. But in coaching people and working with them, they often say, tell me what to do. And I'll say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's up to you. You know that. But at the end of the day, you can always say, is it all right if I give you an example? And if they do, I say, I'm taking off my HLC hat and putting my president hat on. I've been a president of a college and university twice. And I know what you're thinking. I know what you're feeling. Let's kind of go from there. So I think the thing is to really work. And I remember speaking to all the AGB consultants at one time. I was asked when Rick Lagan was president, come in trying to explain, this is a coaching question and this is a mentoring question. But just as we can micromanage when we are giving people help, we'll use the term help broadly, we have to be careful that our example is not about them, it's about us. And so you try to help them work toward the right answer. And if they go off in left field, you have to creatively bring them back.
That is fantastic. Coaching as, instead of advice. But that, I think, is, I'll let you jump in, Doug, but for anyone, not just if you're managing or supporting college presidents, but if you have employees, the coaching method is definitely the way for them to actually learn the learning instead of just follow the path that they're told to do. Pulling that, helping people kind of pull the wisdom out of themselves is just, that's a very smart, that's a smart strategy to push.
Just like Bridget asked before about learning from good leadership examples or bad ones, I'm curious what you view as both sort of your proudest moment as a leader and the sort of hardest experience or chapter you have had to navigate. I suppose they could be the same thing, I suppose, but curious what sort of, when you think about like the moments where you felt like you shined the most and did achieve the most, and the one where you really struggled.
Recently at our conference, give you a spontaneous answer. We have an annual conference, as you know, Doug, you've been there, where, close to 4,000 people attend. And I always have to, I talk about the trends. So I'm not delivering good news right now in higher education. And I collect everything you all have written and the other group in higher education that writes every morning that we read, and Forbes and Wall Street Journal and all that. And the reviews were, you delivered horrible news with a great sense of humor and gave us hope. And I suspect if I do that overall, and that's what I try to do within the organization, then I see myself as a successful leader. Because I always say, if you're having a bad day, don't come into the office, because the way the leader is the way everybody else picks up that kind of mood, and especially if it's a negative mood. I would say where I have faltered is where I haven't listened well enough and I passed judgment. And I have learned through coaching, judgment's not an option. You have to just totally get rid of that. And that takes a lot of work. And so judgment predetermines what you see as the outcome. And maybe you ought to hear like both sides. So even in elections where I may not like one candidate, I listen to both sides to make an informed decision. Well, we are an evidence-based organization, and where I have faltered is if I have a sense of judgment in my head that's getting in the way, where I can't listen well.
That's great. That's I want to be able to give really bad news in a way that people enjoy it. That's a masterful skill, or that it's not as difficult. Yeah. I am curious about, so you have been a college president and you have been consulting and advising and supporting institutions, and you've also run HLC. I am curious about the most surprising aspect of your career. Did you see yourself here? Has there been one, if you think back, like what is the most surprising part of the career, the very long and distinguished career you've had?
Well, nobody plans to be the head of an accrediting agency. I'll tell you that right now. So that just happens by, it's organic and evolutionary. I would say the biggest surprise in my career is when I was at a very large community college in Rochester, New York, Monroe Community College, and people were plotting to get me to go for a presidency, and I didn't know I was ready yet. And so people pull you forward. Even when I was at the state regents in Oklahoma, Thurman White, who was historically very well known in continuing education, he was pulling me forward to work there, and you get surprised, which is it's humble, but on the other hand, everybody has imposter syndrome. Everybody, and anyone I've ever talked to or coached says I'm not good enough, and I don't think I thought I wasn't good enough. I think it was more a matter of, now, was I ready? Because I have been told, and I must say females are told this more, when I was younger, you're not ready yet. And you hear it, you're not ready yet. And then you think, well, if you don't give me a chance, how can I get ready? And so when it became a pattern of you're not ready yet, and then all of a sudden, wow, you're ready, you say, really? Like, what happened now? So I would say that was a wonderful surprise.
That's great. And I'm curious about, so can we connect that dot with the role of interims?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we are consistently being surprised as a sector that the people we choose to be an interim are now going to become that for, if not that institution, another one. And yet I don't really see an intentional strategy as a sector where we are cultivating a new generation of talent or a different or more perspectives into leadership roles. We often rely on a reliable somebody we know or somebody who's already done the job. And I'm just wondering if, given your experience, if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, to use the term you use, I think it's talent activation. And I've got talent management as one of the trends. I think there are groups that do pretty good training. There's Aspen Fellows, there's ACE Fellowships, there's Executive Leadership Institute for the League for Innovation in the Community College. But the best way is what I had, where you bring people in and you say, this is someone who is, in her 30s, 40s, whatever, and you're going to have a long career in higher education. We see this in you. So we're going to call out what you need to work on, and we're going to give you an opportunity to grow. And then it just becomes natural. I was called out when I was 28 for talking back to deans because I was pushing distance learning, and I couldn't believe they didn't get it. Okay. And so I was in an open space community college, and the president, who favored me, gave me this big lecture on how a faculty member should talk to deans. And you know what? I gave myself such a gift because I actually believed him and listened. And I took that burden of knowing everything off my shoulders. So you need people like that. But what can we do, those of us who've been around the block? We owe it to pay it forward. We owe it to want people to have our jobs and to do a good job. And it's very hard to be a college president now. People say to me, would you go back to one? Hell no. And it's not that I love my job, and that's a big part of it, but it's really, really challenging. And there's so many others that are influencing us that we really owe it to toughen up and help these people find the courage and the excitement and celebrate the best day of the year, graduation day. If you're a president, there's nothing that beats that. So we have to get them enthused and trained.
Yeah, 100%. Great. Doug, do you want to? You're on.
Yep, sure. Yeah. What are the Bridget likes to close. We're getting close to the end with sort of the best advice you have ever received in your career.
Read Machiavelli, read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, never miss a funeral, a birthday, an anniversary. And that came from a real seasoned politician. And never kiss a baby if you don't really want to. So genuine ways that you show people that you care is absolutely the best advice I ever got.
So wait, say more about the never miss a birthday, so if you get invited to anything, you definitely go. For your employees, like this is
I'm not saying I get invited. I'm saying I've got everybody's birthday on my calendar, everyone I ever work with on my calendar. I think one year, Doug, I knew it was your birthday and I sent you a note. It's the kind of thing that it's everybody's special day. I'm very empathetic also when it comes to tragedies and difficulties, and that's genuine. And I have been told across my career, thank you for caring about us. But frankly, people see accreditors as someone in a distance and someone who might police them. We want to be seen as innovative, like the credential lab we're doing, etc. But I want to be seen and represent HLC as someone who cares. So knowing your audience is advice that actually I got from my first speech teacher, and I was a speech major. And I just spoke to a whole state, and I studied, I won't say the number, Doug will name the state, the community college presidents. And I spent hours and hours and hours reading about them so I could look at them and say, who's the skydiver? And it was very genuine, but it's a matter of knowing folks and showing them that you actually respect and care about them.
That's great. So I am curious about the advice that so first off, I want to say it correctly because you said that you don't give advice, you coach. But we typically would ask when you're asked by people who are aspiring to roles like yours, what advice you give. But I don't know if you're comfortable with us talking about the coaching aspect. I find it really innovative and dynamic that in the midst of COVID, because things were so challenging, that you sought learning how to become certified as a life coach. And so I'd love if you'd be willing to share about that, but also
Sure.
talk to us about what that experience has been like and what coaching you provide that you think resonates the most for younger folks.
Well, I also got certified in resilience coaching, and I think that was definitely tied to COVID. I think what I would advise people is to be excited about where they're going. Don't ever go away from a job, go to a job, because if you go away, you might find the same problems at the next job. I do think people should have mentors and coaches. I think it made all the difference in my life. And so I really would encourage people in general, don't walk the journey alone. Between the people you've got to network a lot. And you have to like it. If you don't have the personality that likes raising money and going out and raising friends and being with people, I'm the last one to leave a party. So I think it's the kind of thing that you give people the opportunity to find what their sweet spot is, what means the most for them. And sometimes the advice is don't get seduced by a job that a headhunter calls you for, because it may not be the right job. So I strongly advocate for writing down what your latitude of acceptance, what you would want in rejection is in a job, location, boss, all those kinds of things. So you can pull that piece of paper out and look at it when you feel very proud that someone just called you for a job, because that hunter is calling hundreds of other people too. So be ready. Love what you do. I did not make this up. There's a job, a career, and a calling. And if you can possibly find the calling, you will succeed.
I love it. I feel inspired, hopeful now. I feel like I just got the little motivation I needed today.
There's a bunch of books on the shelf behind you. Are there one or two sort of books either on leadership or that you mentioned Machiavelli before, you mentioned Art of War. What are there books that you again tend to recommend to people that have most inspired your career?
Pusnes and Kostner, their Leadership Challenge, and every other book they've written. They are fabulous. It's evidence-based. They've interviewed hundreds of thousands of individuals on leadership traits at all levels of an organization. And I actually put the books up when I talked to my large group in my welcome address. And they're not outdated. I used it when I taught leadership years and years ago. And they keep having other iterations. And I think the latest is the 7th or the 8th volume, but they've also written one on leaders in higher ed. So they've tailored it. So Kouzes is Kouzes, I believe, and Posner, Posner, Leadership Challenge. And I challenge everybody listening this to challenge yourself to be great leaders.
That is a perfect try. We've had that book recommended before. I bought it. That is a very big book. I was not expecting that. I thought it was going to be just like a coffee table, or like a side table. No, it's like a real academic book. And now I realize that I haven't actually read it, and so you are giving me the inspiration to go back. I'm like, it was one of those purchases where I was like, this can change my life, and I was like, wow, that's really intense. So now I'm gonna actually follow up. Well, Barbara, this has been really lovely. I am just so excited because I first met you and we had the conversation about life coaching, and I was just like, this is a really interesting perspective, and you also have such a depth and breadth of understanding of the field. So I'm so grateful that you are in the role that you are and the leadership that you provide to the sector, and that you were able to share with us your wisdom today. So just thank you so much. And Doug, we're just so happy to have you back. And for those of you at home, we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much.
Take care.